Her son drove her to a motel after the funeral and said, "You'll stay here until we figure things out." Eleanor didn't unpack. She opened her handbag and pulled out the lawyer's card. By nightfall, the will would be under scrutiny. By morning, everything Michael thought was his would be questioned. And when he came to collect, she would be ready. "We're just getting started, but before we dive in, tell me, where are you listening from? These stories aren't just mine, they're mirrors." Drop your city in the comments, and if you believe in second chances, hit subscribe. At the funeral home exit, my son reached out a car key and said, "You're just staying here now." The air outside the funeral home was too bright, not sunny, just bright. In that cruel, indifferent way certain afternoons can be when the world doesn't know what you've just buried. Eleanor Green adjusted the black scarf around her neck. It had belonged to Richard. His idea of formal had always leaned toward soft cashmere and comfortable quiet. She hadn't worn it for him. She wore it for herself, to hold something of his near her throat, where the grief pressed hardest. Michael appeared at her side, offering his arm like a gentleman, except it felt rehearsed. Too careful, like he was managing a task. "You ready, Mom?" he asked gently enough, but his jaw was already tight, like he was bracing for something that hadn't even happened. Eleanor nodded once. Her knees ached from the standing, the hugging, the sitting, the standing again. Widowhood had a choreography no one rehearsed you for. They walked in silence toward the car. A practical sedan Eleanor didn't recognize. He opened the passenger side, helped her in, then moved briskly around to the driver's seat. The engine purred. They pulled away from the curb. She waited a few blocks before speaking. "Did you leave the porch light on?" "I want to." Michael didn't look at her. "We're not going back to the house today." Eleanor blinked. "What do you mean?" He signaled left, merging onto the highway. "It's just things are complicated. The kids are flying in, the lawyers need a few things settled." "I'm the one who lives there," she said, voice low but pointed. "You'll stay somewhere else until we figure everything out," he replied, like he was reading from a script. The words didn't register at first. Then her heart kicked sharp and disoriented, like her body knew before her mind did that something had snapped. "I'd planned to start sorting the photos," she said. "The ones in his office. We packed most of those. They're in storage now." A beat of silence. "You packed our house." "I had to make fast decisions," the estate lawyer said. "That wasn't your decision to make." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Michael exhaled, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "We're not doing this today, but they will." She turned her gaze to the window. Nebraska fields blurred past, flat, endless, indifferent, like the world had always known she'd end up like this. A woman with half a life erased, the other half told to wait. 20 minutes later, the car slowed. A roadside motel came into view. 2 floors, faded brick, parking lot, half full. A flickering sign blinked. Pine Haven Lodge, weekly rates, hot coffee. As if hope could be brewed and poured from behind a counter. Michael pulled in and parked close to the stairwell. "I booked the second-floor room." "It's quiet," he said, already unbuckling. Eleanor didn't move. "What exactly is this, Michael?" "A rest stop." He stepped out, came around, opened her door. "It's a temporary stay." "For whom?" she asked. "For you. Until we sort through next steps." She looked up at him, really looked. The boy she'd raised had dimmed behind some older hardened layer, one who avoided eye contact when things got human. "I see," she took his hand for support, not because she needed help, but because sometimes holding on is the most dignified way to say goodbye. Inside, the lobby smelled like stale coffee and citrus cleaner. A woman behind the desk handed over a room key without making eye contact. Eleanor took it in silence. In the elevator, she texted Ruth. "Didn't expect exile today. Will call when I can." No emoji. No sign-off. Once in the room, she opened her handbag and reached between a travel-size lotion and a lavender handkerchief. Her fingers closed around a small white rectangle. Her lawyer's card. She didn't cry. She just laid it on the bedside table like a compass. Michael walked past her, opened the dresser, and dropped a set of keys on the floral bedspread. "You'll be fine," he said, eyes already on the door. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving the room and its silence completely and solely hers. He expected silence. I sat down on the bed and didn't unpack. The door clicked shut behind him, with a finality that didn't match the floral wallpaper. It smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and rusted pipe water, the kind of place designed not to be remembered. Eleanor stood in the center of the room for a long moment. The suitcase Michael had carried in sat at the foot of the bed, half-zipped open. Inside, folded slacks, travel-sized toiletries, and 2 blouses she'd never seen before. Someone, likely Michael's wife, had chosen comfort over familiarity. On the small dresser, there was a tissue box, a copy of Nebraska Living, and an unwrapped bar of Motel brand soap. Next to the lamp, a note in Michael's handwriting: "Breakfast at 8, lobby. I'll pick you up for a lawyer's meeting at 11. She didn't move to hang her clothes, didn't brush out the wrinkles, or open the small drawer of the nightstand, where the Bible always weighed. Instead, she sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded in her lap, and let the silence expand. The walls were thin. She could hear a couple arguing 2 doors down. She could hear a vacuum somewhere below. But none of it touched her. She let her eyes wander to the heavy drapes with cigarette burns, the crooked frame of a painting titled Harvest Glory, the air conditioner that sputtered and sighed like an old man who knew better. Her phone buzzed. It was Ruth. "Do you want me to drive up, or do we escalate quietly?" Eleanor didn't reply yet. Instead, she opened the browser on her phone and signed into the cloud folder Ruth had set up after Richard's initial diagnosis, for emergency or interference only. It had seemed paranoid at the time. She tapped through the files: advance directives, the original trust documents, the prenuptial amendment Richard signed 2 years after they married, and the property deed they'd finally paid off just 3 months ago. A sharp breath pushed through her lips. That house, the one with the hydrangeas he insisted on planting out front, even though they barely survived the winters. She remembered them both out there, him in old gloves, her in his oversized flannel jacket, laughing because they had no idea what they were doing. They bought that house together. She hadn't simply moved in, she'd built it with him, wall by wall, grief by grief. The motel's ceiling fan hummed overhead, stirring air that didn't help the heat. She reached into her purse again, and pulled out a clean notepad. She wrote 3 words at the top of the page: guardianship, estate access. Then, in careful strokes, she started drafting the email to Ruth. Subject: initiate filing, body: let's proceed with the guardianship and estate protections. I don't need confrontation, I need clarity. I'll send a formal address once confirmed. Eleanor, she pressed send. Outside, a lawn mower started up. Her hands went still as she listened, not to the sound itself, but to the way it wasn't her garden. Not the orchard Richard had dreamed of expanding. Not the stretch of grass she used to trim in wide arcs, so he wouldn't worry about it on bad days. This was borrowed space. Sanitized exile. There was a knock at the door. Eleanor's shoulders tensed, but when she opened it, no one was there. Just a plastic shopping bag, hanging from the knob. Inside, apples, a bottle of water, and a note from Michael: in case you didn't want to come down in the morning. She placed the bag on the small table, and returned to the bed. Her phone buzzed again. Ruth: we'll start with access. First step, get their address for service. Eleanor stared at the screen. She didn't smile, but she nodded once. She stood, crossed to the dresser mirror, and whispered to her reflection: let's see how quiet they stay when I knock next. He thinks this is about care. For me, it's about control. The breakfast room smelled like waffle batter and burnt coffee. Faux leather chairs scraped over linoleum floors, and the TV above the juice machine played a muted weather report. Eleanor sat by the window. She'd chosen the corner booth, where she could see the parking lot and the check-in desk and anyone who might try to surprise her. Michael arrived 5 minutes late, hair still damp from the shower, slacks too pressed for morning. I hope the eggs aren't powdered, he said, sliding into the seat across from her. But honestly, this place isn't half bad. They've got convenience nailed. Eleanor blinked slowly, stirring her tea. I'm sure that's what matters when you're displacing your mother. He smiled too wide and too quick. I just meant you've got everything here you need. Quiet. Staff nearby, microwave dinners if you want. She didn't answer. She let the silence swell between them, just enough for discomfort to rise. I was thinking, she said finally, we should probably look at the household bills this week. The estate account, any lingering balances from the medical side of things. Michael shifted. It's complicated, especially with the bigger kids involved now. Rebecca and Jared, he said quickly. They're both named in the family clause. Dad always said the property was more than a home. It's an asset, Mom. An asset, Eleanor echoed, voice dry as bone. He picked up his plastic fork, stabbed at the melon chunk. It's just a lot of pieces moving at once. Emotions are high. I don't want to rush things. Her eyes sharpened. You rushed me out of my house. Michael's mouth opened, but no words came. He reached for his coffee instead. She leaned forward slightly. Michael, the paperwork, the will. When do I get a copy? It's being reviewed, he muttered, his gaze drifting toward the television. By Dad's estate attorney. With everything, you know, we're waiting to make sure everyone's on the same page. I'm on the page. And I lived in the margins for 30 years. He looked back at her. Finally, a flicker of guilt or maybe fear crossed his face. But he said nothing. She smiled softly. This motel was a good touch. You've almost convinced yourself this is about my comfort. He bristled. You know that's not fair. I know that's not true. Neither spoke for a long time. Across the room, a man refilled the waffle machine. Eleanor watched syrup drip onto a chipped plate. She pulled her handbag onto her lap, opened the side zipper, and retrieved 2 receipts, one from the hospital, one from the funeral home, both in her name, both paid by her. She folded them precisely, and slid them into the notebook she kept between her reading glasses and her lip balm. She added a fresh napkin from the breakfast table. Michael had scribbled something on it and left it behind when he went to refill his coffee. His handwriting had always leaned left, like it was trying to retreat. When she looked up, Michael had returned to the table, phone in hand. I've got a quick call, he said, eyes already elsewhere. Lawyer follow-up. I'll be back by noon. Eleanor nodded once, already placing the napkin in her purse. Back in the room, she removed her shoes and sat cross-legged on the bed. She opened her phone, uploaded the documents to the folder Ruth had created, then took a photo of the napkin and labeled it handwriting breakfast note. The truth was in fragments now, but she'd collect every one. Evening fell like a curtain, thick and too soon. The hallway outside buzzed faintly, as guests shuffled in from whatever lives they paused long enough to sleep here. Then came a knock at the front desk window. Eleanor peeked through the blinds. The clerk was holding a white envelope. He scanned the name, looked around, then stepped toward her door. The envelope was thick, handwritten, sealed in red wax, and addressed only to Mrs. Eleanor Green. It was addressed only to me with no send. Everything shifted in those lines. The envelope was thick and stiff, sealed in red wax that had cracked slightly along the edge. Eleanor stared at it on the bedspread, her name written in ink, so sharp it looked like it had been pressed into the paper with purpose. No return address, no postmark. She didn't touch it at first. The motel clock blinked 7:14 p.m. Finally she opened the flap with the edge of her nail file, careful not to smudge the wax. Inside was a single folded sheet of stationery, expensive, creamy and heavy in the hand. No letterhead, just black ink, typed and centered. Mrs. Green, you have until Friday at noon to formally relinquish your claim to the estate property and financial holdings per clause revision. If not, the trust will be restructured under the surviving heirs' collective petition. No further notice will be given. Her hands went cold. There was no signature, no logo, just the kind of threat dressed in civil terms, where legal intention hides behind etiquette. She read it again. Then again. Her knees locked. She sat. For a moment she didn't feel anything. Not anger, not fear. Just a flat hollowness, like someone had scooped her out and left her echoing. Then, without hesitation, she snapped a photo of the letter and attached it in an email to Ruth. Subject, they're escalating. Body, received this tonight. No name, no signature, but clearly meant to intimidate. Proceed however necessary. She hit send, and stood slowly, smoothing the edges of the letter before folding it back into its envelope. She slipped it into her purse, next to the receipts and napkin from breakfast. The purse was no longer an accessory. It was her archive now. Her phone buzzed within minutes. Ruth, we're filing injunction and temporary trusteeship now. Confirm Michael's location if possible. Eleanor walked to the window and parted the curtain slightly. Michael's car wasn't in the parking lot. She texted, gone since 3 p.m. Said he'd be back by dinner. Still out. Another buzz. Ruth. Then we move. I'm submitting the initial complaint tonight. Need time-stamped photos. I'm contacting the estate judge first thing tomorrow. Eleanor exhaled. Not relief, but steel. She crossed to the small desk, laid the letter flat, and took 3 photos with her phone from different angles, wide shot, detail of the wax seal, and a side shot of the letter beside her ID for scale. As she reviewed the photos, the door clicked open. Michael entered with a to-go cup in one hand, and a tired smile in the other. Sorry, traffic near the expressway was a mess. Brought you peppermint tea. Figured you'd need something warm. She looked up, calm as glass. Something came for me, she said, voice neutral. He blinked. Yeah? From who? She shrugged. No one signed it. Michael frowned. Like spam mail. More personal than that, she said. Some things arrive after goodbye. He opened his mouth, but she was already turning away, folding her scarf into her suitcase, not packing but making space. Michael cleared his throat. You look different. I am, she said, smoothing her hand over the scarf. Different people do different things with grief. He set the tea down, unsure. Are we okay? She met his eyes. Not warm, not cruel, just done. I'm not sure who we is anymore. That landed. He stepped back without saying anything. After he left, she locked the door and sat on the bed in the same place she had that first night. The room hadn't changed, but she had. Her phone vibrated again. Ruth, got something from probate court records. Your son and his siblings filed a preliminary notice to contest the will 4 days before the funeral. Eleanor blinked once, then leaned forward, shoulders set. She opened her contacts and scrolled to Mallory. Typed 2 words, come here. Added 1 more. Tonight. She hit send, and watched the typing bubbles appear instantly. She arrived under the nightlight, and said she knows you better than they think. Eleanor didn't hear the knock. She felt it. A soft tap, like someone trying not to be caught, half warning, half whisper. She opened the door slowly, expecting Michael again. It was. Mallory stood there in a denim jacket 2 sizes too big, and eyes that had already seen too much for 27. Her hair was up in a messy knot, phone clutched in one hand, and a takeout bag in the other. I parked 2 blocks away, she said, stepping inside. Didn't want anyone following me. Eleanor closed the door behind her. Did your father send you? Mallory shook her head. I'm not here for him. Eleanor crossed her arms. You shouldn't be caught in this. I already am, Mallory said, voice low but I heard things. Eleanor hesitated, unsure whether to sit or stand. She settled on perching on the edge of the dresser, arms still folded. What things? Mallory dropped the takeout on the table and pulled out her phone. They're not just talking about the will, they're talking about the house, flipping it, selling it off in pieces. Eleanor flinched, her jaw tightened. They said it wouldn't be hard, Mallory added, her eyes darting to the wall. Because you're grieving, because you don't like conflict, because you'd rather disappear than argue. The words hit harder than she expected. Eleanor stood again, turning her back to her granddaughter, her hand briefly resting on the edge of the nightstand where the lamp flickered. Mallory continued. I read some of the I wasn't supposed to see them, but Jared left his iPad open at the lake house. I took pictures. She pulled up the screen, handed it over. Group messages, subject lines like probate leverage, get ahead of her. No pushback expected. Eleanor sat on the bed this time. Mallory watched her closely. I didn't want to believe it at first, but I know you, better than they think I do. Eleanor looked up. You were always the quiet one. Mallory gave a crooked smile. Eleanor tapped her phone awake and scrolled to the shared legal folder, the same one Ruth had built. She patted the mattress. Sit, you should see what they're trying to erase. Mallory sat beside her. Together they scrolled, property tax forms, healthcare directives, scanned copies of Richard's amended trust, even a video file labeled April, Richard's voice message. Mallory blinked at the screen. This is gold. Why haven't we gone public? Because it's not about spectacle. It's about record. This is a life, not a news cycle. Mallory nodded slowly. Then let me be your witness. Web, cloud, photo. I'll help store everything. If they're erasing you, we'll make you impossible to delete. Eleanor turned her head to look at her. She didn't speak. Instead, she reached across the bed and took Mallory's hand. Not dainty, not grandmotherly, firm, intentional. You're more my daughter tonight than they ever were. Mallory swallowed hard, blinking too fast. You don't mean that. I do. Silence hung between them for a long beat. The only sound was the humming fridge and the distant creak of the upstairs ice machine. Mallory cleared her throat. I brought you lemon soup. You haven't eaten, have you? Eleanor shook her head, smiling faintly. I'd forgotten what hunger feels like. They ate quietly, the motel light making everything look sepia-toned and older than it was. By the time they'd finished, it was past midnight. Mallory curled up in the armchair, knees pulled to her chest, phone charging beside her. Eleanor lay on the bed, not sleeping, just thinking, listening. She felt different now, not steadier, but witnessed. The next morning came with birdsong and someone knocking, not on the door but on the wall outside the room. A shadow passed the frosted window. Eleanor pulled on her sweater and opened the door. It was the motel manager, clipboard in hand. I was asked to deliver some paperwork, he said, clearing his throat. By Michael Green's legal team. Said you'd need to sign. Eleanor took the envelope, but this time, she smiled. Then I'll need a He requested papers to be served here. It felt more like eviction than hospitality. The motel manager's shoes squeaked as he shifted his weight, still holding the manila envelope like it might burn him if he clutched it too long. I don't know what's in it, he said quickly. Just told to get a signature. Eleanor took the envelope with both hands, deliberate and unhurried. Do you have a pen? He handed one over with a small nod, eyes darting to Mallory behind her. You, need me to witness? I have someone better, Eleanor said. Mallory stepped forward with her phone already out, timestamping everything. The manager gave a small, respectful nod and backed down the hallway. Eleanor turned the envelope in her hands. No red wax this time, just printed legal stamps, tight-packed documents, and a printed return label from a firm she didn't recognize. She opened it slowly, carefully, like cracking the spine of a book that might change everything. Inside, a cover letter from Ruth, crisp and formal, a temporary protective guardianship notice, a verified filing to secure her estate claim, a request for Michael Green and co-heirs to cease communication until the injunction hearing. Mallory photographed each document as Eleanor laid them out on the motel bedspread. There was no tremble in Eleanor's hands now. This isn't what fear feels like, she said softly. This is what power tastes like when it's quiet. Mallory glanced up. You're incredible. No, Eleanor said. I'm done. A knock sounded again, this time from the lobby window. Ruth stepped inside the breakfast area, visible through the lobby glass. She held her phone up like a flag, then disappeared toward the front desk. Eleanor and Mallory gathered the documents, slid them back into their envelope, and made their way downstairs. At the front desk, Ruth stood beside the manager, calm and composed in a wool coat and flats. Her expression didn't shift when Eleanor approached, just softened, slightly. I brought a physical set in case electronic filings fail, Ruth said, holding out a duplicate folder. Received and signed, Eleanor replied. Michael was already there. He stood near the corner of the lobby, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes focused somewhere between the floor and the exit sign. He didn't speak, didn't move, but he was watching, like a child pretending he hadn't broken something while the pieces were swept away. Ruth turned slightly to him but didn't address him. Mallory stepped in front of Eleanor, raising her phone again. You okay with me documenting? Eleanor nodded. She placed the signed copy of the service documents on the counter. The manager retrieved his clipboard, checked a box, then awkwardly reached below the desk. I, made a fresh pot. Do you want coffee? He asked Eleanor. On the house. Eleanor smiled, not politely, but honestly. Yes. He handed her a small styrofoam cup, and didn't ask for anything more. It was kindness, unsaid and uncomplicated. Eleanor took the cup and stepped toward the lobby window. The late morning sun had begun to push through She caught her reflection in the glass, sharp lines, gray roots, an old sweater that had once been Richard's, but it wasn't weariness she saw. It was foundation. A shape returning. She turned to Ruth. When's the hearing? 7 days. But today mattered more. Ruth said, Today they saw you sign. Behind them Michael finally moved. He stepped forward, barely audible over the buzz of the vending machine. I didn't think it would go this far. Eleanor didn't turn around. You didn't think I would. She walked past him. Mallory followed, shoulder brushing Michael as she passed. You should sit this one out. She muttered. It's not your story anymore. Back in the room, Eleanor placed the folder beside the bed, the coffee warming her hands more than her chest. She sat at the window, watching cars pass the highway beyond the tree line. Mallory was back in the armchair, uploading photos, syncing files to Ruth's secure drive. By dusk, the light dimmed. Lamps buzzed. Outside the wind picked up. Then, another knock. This time the door. Eleanor didn't move right away. She waited. It came again, slower, heavier. Not the clerk. Not the manager. She stood. Mallory looked up. Eleanor opened the door. Michael stood there, eyes red, hands empty. I need to talk, he said. Eleanor stepped aside, but left the door halfway open, and didn't say he could come in. He came in angry, but his voice wavered when I was no longer Michael stepped over the threshold as if stepping into court, shoulders tight, breath clipped, gaze scanning the room like he expected to be cornered. The door clicked softly behind him. Mallory stayed seated, cross-legged on the armchair, but her phone tilted slightly in her palm, recording just in case. Eleanor remained still by the window, one hand resting on the ledge, the other wrapped around her cooling coffee. Why? Michael said, voice already brittle. Why are you doing this, Mom? Eleanor didn't answer right away. She turned slowly, met his eyes, then walked past him toward the small table near the bed. Calm. Deliberate. You brought legal fire into this family. He said louder. You of all people escalated. Eleanor set her coffee down. You requested I be removed from my home. That's not a conversation. That's an act of force. Michael's nostrils flared. It was temporary. It was to give you space to grieve. No, she cut in. It was to gain time. Time to move assets. Time to build a case behind my back. You said temporary with a key in one hand and a lawyer on speed dial. He took a half step closer. This is bigger than just you, Mom. Dad didn't build all this for it to die with one generation. Eleanor didn't flinch. He built it with me, brick by brick, grief by grief. You don't get to rewrite who mattered. Michael laughed bitterly. You think this is betrayal, but all we're doing is protecting what's left. Then protect it honestly, she said, her voice low and edged. Trust was our vow. Your actions broke it. His tone dropped. You made this legal war out of family heartbreak. Mallory stood now, quiet, but solid. No, she said. You broke her heart first. This war, she's just refusing to lose quietly. Michael turned to her, eyes tired but defiant. You think you know what's best because you're young and full of righteous noise. I know what it looks like when someone tries to silence grief with paperwork, Mallory said. You didn't expect her to push back. You didn't expect me to stay. Eleanor stepped forward, gently brushing Mallory's arm before facing Michael again. Family isn't forced silence, she said. It's honest presence, and you weren't present, you were strategic. He stared at her, the rage ebbing into something closer to shame or the beginning of it. But the defenses were still there, coiled behind his jaw. I hope you enjoy the legal circus, he said, backing toward the door. Because that's all this will become now. I didn't start the circus, Eleanor said softly, but I won't be the clown in it. He yanked open the door, the rusted hinge shrieking under his hand. The motel hallway flooded with cool air, dull light spilling in like judgment. Michael turned once more. I won't forget this. You already forgot who I was. Eleanor replied. The door slammed behind him like a gavel. Eleanor didn't move. Mallory did, walking to the door, locking it quietly. Then she returned to Eleanor's side, placing a hand gently on her back. Eleanor let out a breath, one she hadn't realized she'd been holding. I don't know what hurt more, she murmured. His voice, or how much it used to mean to me. You don't owe him the same space, Mallory said. Not after what he's trying to take. Eleanor reached for her coffee again, took one small sip. Her hands weren't shaking. Outside, the hallway was still. No footsteps, no more knocks. Then a whisper of sound. Not a voice, just paper. Eleanor glanced toward the floor. A thick manila envelope had been slid under the door. Mallory crouched, picked it up, and handed it over without a word. Eleanor opened it. Inside, loan requests, draft filings, property seizure forms, all marked intent to initiate. She exhaled, slow and sure, as if the air itself was waiting for permission. Her lips barely moved, but her voice was clear. They're trying to put a price on memory. She walked to the desk, opened her laptop and whispered, then it's time we remind them what history costs. They filed attempts to line the house. My grief was now collateral. Eleanor sat in front of the motel desk, the glow of her laptop illuminating every wrinkle and line on her face like a topography of survival. The loan drafts lay beside her, sprawled like a crime scene. Mallory, cross-legged on the bed, was scanning each page into a shared folder, her fingers flying across the screen with quiet fury. They filed these together, Eleanor said. Not asking. Mallory nodded. Michael, Jared, Rebecca. Joint signatures, filed out of county to avoid early notice. Cowardice in carbon copy. Eleanor muttered. Her phone buzzed. Ruth. Confirmed. Line threats were preemptive. They're trying to force liquidation under implied incompetence. I've initiated an emergency freeze. Eleanor blinked. They want the house liquidated before the hearing, she said aloud. More to the room than to Mallory. They're calling it early estate resolution. They're calling it theft, Mallory said. Just in legal dialect. Eleanor's hand hovered over them. Her body didn't tremble. She'd moved past tremors. This wasn't fear now. It was ferocity. I was married in that house, she whispered. Tended to your grandfather's chemo pills in its kitchen. Spoke my vows in the living room. Rewrote my entire life behind that porch swing. Mallory looked up, eyes sharp. Then let's protect it like the history it is. She opened her laptop and pulled up a spreadsheet. Bank statements, savings, final joint trust filings. Everything Grandpa marked in the 6 months before he passed. I saved the original. They're backed up across 3 clouds. Eleanor almost smiled. Almost. Your father always underestimated your generation. That's because we digitized our memory, Mallory said. They thought we were just posting selfies. The wind shifted outside the motel. The curtains stirred. Somewhere a semi-truck hummed past on the highway, indifferent to grief or war. A notification popped up. Midwestern Elder Advocacy Group. Legal aid response available. Mallory clicked it open. They flagged your case, she said. Ruth must have reached out. You've got preliminary support now, from the advocacy network. Eleanor leaned back. I never thought I'd be in a category. You're not a case, Mallory said. You're a headline they've seen too many times. They just finally have someone willing to fight back. Eleanor didn't reply. Instead, she reached across the desk, pulled out her reading glasses and clicked open her voice memos. The recording beeped. This is Eleanor Green, she began, voice steady, not cold. If you're hearing this, it's because you've received a copy of documents related to the contested trust, the line filings, or the real property known as Green Homestead. I am of sound mind legal standing, and emotional clarity. If they strip my home, they strip my story, and I will not allow that to go uncontested. She paused. This is not a surrender, this is a witness. She tapped the stop button, saved the file, uploaded it. Mallory sat forward. Say that again, she said. What? They strip my home. They strip my story. Her eyes glinted. That's what we call the file archive. That's the headline. Eleanor stared at her for a long moment. Then not. The printer from the motel's small business center groaned faintly down the hall. Probably another traveler printing maps or invoices. Unaware someone in room 21 was fighting to stay in her life. Mallory stood, walked to the mini fridge, grabbed 2 ginger ales and handed one over. You know, she said, cracking hers open. I thought I was just helping out for a day or two. But this is legacy defense. Eleanor tapped her can against Mallory's. To war then. A knock at the door. Both women froze. Not heavy, not urgent, just official. Eleanor walked to the door, and opened it halfway. A courier stood on the other side. Vest. Clipboard. ID badge clipped to the zipper. Ma'am, he said, glancing down. You've been served. Court summons. 10 days. He handed over the envelope and turned to leave, already on to his next stop. Eleanor closed the door behind her and peeled the flap open. She didn't flinch at the language. Scheduled probate review, line petitions, guardianship dispute, trust standing date, 10 days from receipt. Courtroom 3. Mallory waited, silent. Eleanor folded the summons, slipped it into the folder labeled Inheritance Theft Phase 1. Then she clicked her pen and whispered, 10 days. Let's make them count. It was real, not in grief but in legal obligation. The courthouse smelled like old varnish and newer nerves. Eleanor stood in the security line, her blazer buttoned all the way up and her heels low enough to endure. Mallory was beside her, arms wrapped tightly around a manila folder, the one they'd labeled Phase 1 with a black marker and a quiet dare. Inside courtroom 3, the lights were too white and the benches too stiff. The judge's bench rose above them, carved oak framed by the state seal, and the kind of silence that demanded you measure your words by the ounce. Ruth leaned over. He's here. Eleanor didn't turn, but she felt the temperature shift, the self-conscious air of a man who'd once been too sure of himself. Michael sat on the opposite side of the room, flanked by his lawyer, a man in a blue suit too shiny for probate, and Jared, who couldn't stop tugging at his sleeves like they were too tight with guilt. The judge entered. Everyone stood. A gavel dropped once. The hearing began. Probate review, the clerk announced. Matter of Green Trust Estate, petition for guardianship, line contestation and standing. Ruth stood first. Your Honor, we represent Miss Eleanor Green, sole surviving spouse and co-trustee of the Green Estate. We are submitting witness affidavits, financial audits and digital documentation confirming uninterrupted capacity and lawful co-ownership. She handed over the file. The judge flipped it open, eyes unreadable. Michael's attorney followed, stepping forward like a man used to speaking over people. Your Honor, we assert that Mrs. Green has shown signs of diminished capacity following the death of Mr. Richard Green. The family's concern stems from financial irregularities and emotional instability witnessed in the weeks after. Eleanor's hand didn't twitch. She turned her head toward the gallery, where a court-appointed accountant waited patiently for his name to be called. Ruth nodded at the judge. We'd like to call Mr. Thomas Langley, forensic accountant and trustee liaison. Langley took the stand, his tie slightly crooked. I've reviewed all relevant trust expenditures. No misappropriations. Every expense logged matches documentation down to cent value. There is no indication of diminished financial decision-making. The judge asked a few terse questions. Langley answered with calm precision. Next, Mallory. She walked to the witness chair like it was a podium. The bailiff swore her in. Miss Green, the judge said. You've submitted a declaration. Yes, Your Honor. Mallory lifted her voice. I've lived with my grandmother off and on since college. I've seen no confusion, no emotional instability, only grief and clarity. She's filed taxes on time, organized legal files, and responded to every question with awareness and intent. Michael shifted in his seat. Mallory continued. She's also been recorded by me articulating details of the trust's formation, updates and property line disputes with precision that would challenge most attorneys. The judge raised an eyebrow. You recorded her, she consented. Mallory said. Michael's lawyer stood up, objected, citing bias. Sustained for tone, the judge said, but not for content. Then Eleanor was called. She rose and walked to the stand, every step deliberate. No notes in hand. She didn't need them. I buried my husband less than 3 weeks ago, she began, and instead of grief I was handed paperwork. I was told where I could live, how long and under what conditions. Her voice did not tremble. I've been painted as confused, but I remember the vows I made in that home. I remember signing our revised trust 2 years ago. I remember our plan, because I helped build it. Grief doesn't equal incapacity. It doesn't erase me. The judge's eyes narrowed, watching. Ruth returned to her seat, whispered, You just won the room. A brief recess was called. Eleanor and Mallory stepped into the hallway, the echo of heels and low murmurs trailing them. Ruth scrolled through her phone, then froze. What is it? Eleanor asked. Ruth turned the screen. Digital forensic review of the contested trust edits. Michael's admin account shows he uploaded a document 3 days before the funeral. That version. It carries your forged signature. Eleanor blinked once, then leaned against the hallway wall. He forged me, she said, almost softly, even before he buried his father. Inside the courtroom, the judge returned to the bench. The bailiff called the room to order, and the judge looked down folded hands and said, I'll give my preliminary ruling after. He ruled she remains trustee, but there'd be audit oversight. The courtroom filled again, wooden pews creaking under shifting weight, heels echoing like quiet threats across the tile. Eleanor sat straighter than before. Her scarf was still knotted at her collar, but her posture had changed. Not defensive, not proud, ready. Michael hadn't looked her way since returning from recess. He sat flanked by Rebecca and Jared, now both murmuring to his lawyer in anxious fragments. Eleanor caught none of the words, but she saw the color rising in Michael's neck. He hadn't expected the forensic slip. He hadn't planned for a signature to betray him. The judge entered. Everyone rose. The gavel landed once. A single beat that changed the air. The judge adjusted his glasses. His voice was calm, clinical, but not cold. Having reviewed all submitted evidence, including witness testimony, forensic analysis and financial reports, this court finds no cause to grant guardianship or enforce lien liquidation at this time. Eleanor's chest didn't move. She wasn't breathing. Not until he continued. Mrs. Eleanor Green remains co-trustee, with full rights retained. However, he paused, looking down at the papers again. In light of the forged documentation submitted prior to this hearing, a full audit of estate activities from the past 12 months will be conducted by a neutral fiduciary. Michael flinched. His lawyer stiffened. Rebecca leaned in and whispered something sharp. The judge raised a hand. Any further interference in the trust structure without unanimous trustee consent will be subject to contempt review. This includes unauthorized document uploads, asset transfers, or digital amendment. Mallory reached for Eleanor's hand. She missed. Eleanor was already standing. Thank you, Your Honor, Ruth said, rising. We accept those terms. The judge nodded. Next hearing in 30 days. Audit to begin Monday. Gavel down. Court adjourned. Mallory turned to Eleanor. Her eyes were wet, but she hadn't noticed. You did it, she whispered. You didn't just survive this. You named it. Eleanor's fingers found hers and squeezed. We did it, she said softly. Together. On the opposite side, Michael stood. He said something curt to his lawyer, then brushed past Eleanor without a glance. Jared hesitated, gave her a look like maybe he'd forgotten how to apologize, and then followed. Only Rebecca paused. I thought you'd cave, she said under her breath. Eleanor turned toward her, voice low. You always mistake dignity for surrender. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. But she said nothing. They left in a pack, hollow in their silence. Back near the front, Ruth slid her briefcase shut. It's not everything, but it's a wall between you and them now. Eleanor nodded quietly. A wall's enough. For now. I'll be in touch this weekend, Ruth said. But the audit begins Monday. We'll need everything you've got organized. Every receipt, transaction, document, anything that proves chain of trust. Mallory was already pulling out her phone. I'll export all the backups tonight. Drive folders, video logs, timestamps, the witness memos. Eleanor gave her a grateful look. Make sure Ruth has everything by tomorrow. Ruth smiled. You make my job easier than most. Eleanor let the compliment hang. As they stepped outside, the sunlight hit sharper than it had going in. It wasn't warm, but it was clear. That mattered. They walked together down the stone steps, past reporters eyeing other cases, past people arguing over parking tickets and traffic violations. Eleanor held her scarf tight against her throat. Not from cold, from memory. In the parking lot, Mallory turned to her. What now? We go back to the motel, Eleanor said. We sleep. We eat something that isn't from a vending machine. And Monday, Eleanor looked ahead, jaw set. We bring receipts. As they reached the car, Eleanor turned back once, just for a moment, to look at the building. Courtroom 3. She didn't feel like a victor. Not yet. But she no longer felt like someone waiting for permission to speak. Ruth's voice chimed again, this time through text.
Audit scheduled.
9 a.m. Monday. Start gathering everything. We'll need absolute clarity. Eleanor typed back, it's already waiting, then turned to Mallory and said, time to open the archive. They'd tear apart every receipt. I collected years of quiet life in folders. The motel room smelled like printer ink and lemon-scented hand wipes. The bed had been turned into a field of papers, rows of labeled folders, crisp manila and clear plastic sleeves, stretching from corner to corner like a miniature war room. Eleanor sat on the floor this time, her reading glasses balanced low on her nose, hair pulled back with a clip. Mallory had found at a gas station. They'll want itemization, she said, lifting a receipt from 3 years ago for driveway repairs, stamped dates, service names. No gaps. Mallory sat cross-legged opposite her, clicking through folders on the laptop. We're at 470 entries uploaded, she said. I've added two-factor security, cloud-only access with mirrored backup to Ruth's encrypted drive. Eleanor gave a slow nod. Not hiding a thing. Let them come. Mallory clicked again. Sent. The phone buzzed beside them. Ruth, Carolyn's in. We'll start review at 2 p.m. I told her to be brutal. She smiled. Eleanor let out a breath. Good. They continued sorting. Bank statements, letter, photos of the fireplace. Richard rebuilt in '06, when they couldn't afford a contractor. His signature on a check to the cancer center. Eleanor's handwriting on the back of a utility bill, paid early, he's sleeping more lately. Mallory paused. This tells a whole story. Eleanor smiled faintly. They all do. A call lit up Eleanor's screen. Michael Green. She didn't move, didn't blink. The call rang out, then stopped. Seconds later, it rang again. Same name, same silence. She turned the phone face down. I'm not answering until it's not about power, she said. And I don't think he knows how to speak without it anymore. Mallory uploaded 2 more files. At exactly 2, Ruth's face appeared on the motel room tablet, followed by another square. Carolyn Wayne, the independent auditor, blazer, no makeup, hair tied back like she meant business, and had lived through worse. Let's begin, Carolyn said. The next hour passed like a slow exam. Page by page she asked questions, cross-checking totals, asking Eleanor to confirm vendors, matching checks to bank entries, and Eleanor answered them all, calm, exact, not from memory, but from a life lived with care. This one, Carolyn said, finally holding up a scan of an Amazon order, was coded miscellaneous household. What was it? Eleanor leaned in. That was a pack of cotton gloves. He'd started developing sensitivity during chemo. Carolyn nodded. Clear, she said. after a pause. You have no red flags, no anomalies, transparent and complete. Eleanor let out a slow breath. Mallory didn't. She just grinned. Carolyn continued, more gently now. You've documented a life in a way most people don't. I hope that becomes part of the record. It's all I have left, Eleanor replied. And they called it unstable. Ruth added, you just disproved that across 27 tabs. Eleanor leaned back, pulled her scarf tighter. Then we're ready. But she wasn't done. Later that night, after the laptop had cooled and the files were backed up in 3 places, Eleanor opened her purse again, not for receipts or legal letters, but for her old checkbook. She wrote one out in crisp, firm script. Pay to Green Trust Public Counseling Initiative Fund. Memo Pretrial Counseling Conflict Mediation Survivor Recovery. Amount $2,000. Mallory raised an eyebrow. What's that for? They need help, Eleanor said. Not legal help, not courtroom help. Real help. Whatever happens next, someone has to be the first to offer repair. Even after everything? Eleanor shrugged. I won't forget, but I won't let them make me cruel. The room was quiet for a moment. Mallory whispered. That's the difference between you and them. At 11:38 p.m., Ruth's name lit up again. Ruth, heads up. Michael's lawyer just filed a motion. They want Mallory excluded as a participant in the next hearing, claiming conflict of interest and emotional interference. They're pulling gloves off. Mallory leaned over and read the message. Her jaw clenched. Let them try. Eleanor stood slowly and walked to the desk. She picked up the folder labeled Inheritance Theft Phase 1, now thick and color-coded, and placed it next to her travel scarf and pen. Tomorrow, she said, they'll learn what a witness really is. She pulled the motel curtains shut and said to the dark, let the audit begin, with every eye watching. They tried to mute her voice, but she became the loudest truth. The courtroom was colder than it had been 2 days ago, like someone had turned the vents up just to make discomfort another kind of pressure. Eleanor adjusted her scarf, tugging the edge neatly across her collarbone. Mallory stood beside her, shoulders squared, holding the final set of printed records in a navy blue binder. But today she wasn't just a helper. Today she was a target. Judge Harper's voice echoed through the chamber. This court acknowledges receipt of Motion 14B, request for exclusion of Mallory Green as witness, citing conflict of interest, family bias and emotional overreach. Ruth didn't flinch. She stood before the bench like stone in flesh. Your Honor, this attempt to exclude Miss Green is tactical, not ethical. Her statements are first-hand, corroborated, and already verified against time-stamped data and testimony. Family proximity does not negate factual credibility. The opposing counsel stood, smug and ready. She's also emotionally entangled, has lived with the respondent, and has repeatedly referred to the petitioners in disparaging terms. I've referred to them accurately, Mallory interrupted. A hush rippled through the courtroom. Ruth shot her a look. Calm but Mallory clasped her binder tighter and stepped forward. With respect, Your Honor, she said, voice even. Truth doesn't get quieter just because it's uncomfortable. They want me excluded, because I remember things they hope people forget. The judge tilted his head. You believe your proximity strengthens your testimony. I believe it makes it real, she said. I saw what they ignored. I listened when they didn't. And I documented what no one thought to question. Judge Harper leaned back. Silence followed. Then, motion to exclude witness is denied. Miss Green's statements remain admissible. She will testify under oath. This court recognizes her relevance and her restraint. Eleanor didn't breathe. Ruth allowed the smallest smile. The audit review resumed. Carolyn returned with 3 binders of her own, each tabbed and color-coded. She presented findings, pointed to cash flow transparency, property expenses, and consistent behavior from Eleanor as co-trustee. Full compliance, she said, flipping through final pages, including retroactive documentation during periods of terminal illness. No discrepancies. Michael wasn't present. Rebecca sat in the gallery, lips pressed into a hard line. Jared glanced down at his shoes for most of the hour. Their lawyer shuffled papers, already knowing momentum had shifted. Judge Harper reviewed the audit summary in silence, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. This audit confirms prior rulings, he said finally. No misuse of funds, no evidence of diminished capacity. The standing trustee remains within legal and ethical bounds. As the courtroom murmured, the back door opened. Michael appeared. He didn't take a seat. He didn't speak. He just stood at the edge of the room like a man returning to a house he'd tried to sell without a key. His eyes met Eleanor's for the first time. She didn't blink. She didn't nod. She looked at him like he was history, not future. Judge Harper lifted his gavel again. This court adjourns pending final estate clarification hearing. Counsel may prepare additional filings by Friday. Michael turned and walked out before the gavel hit the wood. Eleanor watched him go. A strange heat rose behind her eyes. Not sorrow, not triumph. Something more primal. Something maternal. Ruth leaned over. He's losing ground. And the argument. Mallory turned to Eleanor, her voice lower now. He's scared. Eleanor nodded. He should be. They stepped outside as the sky began to gray. Soft fog pulling along the sidewalk. The kind that softened outlines but not direction. Back at the motel, Eleanor folded away the final audit documents into their binders. Mallory sat at the small table, organizing one last envelope she hadn't opened yet. This came with the reconciliation package, she said, holding it up. It's a trust update post-Rich. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. I don't remember authorizing anything post-Richard. Mallory opened it. She read once, then again. Her voice caught. Grandma, you need to see this. She slid the final page across the table. There it was, in Richard's familiar signature, a final amendment to the Green Trust, dated 6 weeks before his passing, a clause Eleanor hadn't known existed. In the event of legal dispute among beneficiaries, co-fund guardianship shall transfer to spouse and designated successor. Eleanor touched the page like it might vanish. Her throat tightened, but her eyes sharpened. Then we're not fighting for legacy, she whispered. We are it. Mallory pressed the folder closed. Tomorrow I bring it to court. In my name, they filed to strip me. I filed to empower Mallory. The courthouse was fuller today. Word had spread slowly, but surely. The Green Estate case wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It had become a referendum on generational silence, on grief, as leverage, on what it meant to be believed too late. Eleanor sat beside Ruth in the front row, her scarf tucked carefully under her coat's lapel. Mallory stood just behind them, holding the new motion like it weighed more than paper. It did. Judge Harper entered. The shuffle of suits and shoes halted. The gavel. Court resumes for continuation of Green Trust matter. Filing before us. Request to amend co-fund guardianship status. Ruth stood sharp and steady. Your Honor, the Green Trust contains an unexecuted clause previously overlooked, dated 6 weeks prior to Mr. Green's passing. This clause names Mallory Green as designated successor co-fund guardian in the event of legal contest among heirs. She held the document aloft, stamped and notarized. Judge Harper raised an eyebrow. Additionally, Ruth added, we submit letters of support from the community, affirming Miss Green's long-term involvement in Mrs. Green's care and in the family's estate documentation. These come from healthcare workers, financial advisors and neighbors. Michael leaned forward in his seat, jaw flexing. Objection, his lawyer said flatly. The clause was hidden, introduced last minute. The petitioner is 27 years old, hardly seasoned enough to manage estate oversight. Judge Harper blinked, yet seasoned enough to serve as power of attorney during Richard Green's final treatment rounds. The courtroom murmured. Michael slammed his palm flat against the table. This is a stunt. The judge turned his gaze. Mr. Green, you will compose yourself or be removed. Michael sat back, muttering to his lawyer. Ruth continued, calm as ever. Mallory has already submitted full witness testimony, digital records and audit materials. Her presence has been not only lawful, but essential. The judge turned to Mallory. Miss Green, do you wish to speak? Mallory stepped forward, hands trembling slightly, but her voice didn't waver. I've been caring for my grandmother since I was 19, she began. Not every day, not full-time, but enough to see what others chose to miss. She lifted the file. This isn't about money to me, it's about memory. About making sure the quiet details, like Grandpa's last check to the hospice center, or the kitchen receipts she paid with her own card, aren't erased for convenience. Her voice cracked. Just once. I'm not here because I think I deserve power. I'm here because I showed up when no one else did. Eleanor looked down at her lap. Her hands were folded, but she'd gone still. Michael's attorney stood again. Your Honor, we maintain that this is an emotional appeal, not a legal one. The trust deserves sober oversight, not sentiment. Judge Harper tilted his head. You think care and capability are mutually exclusive. Silence. He shuffled the papers, leaned forward and spoke clearly. This court grants temporary co-guardianship to Mallory Green for the duration of the audit phase. Full standing to be reviewed pending a state clarification hearing. Motion approved. The gavel fell. Mallory let out a breath. Not relief, something deeper. A kind of vindication that didn't smile. It just stood taller. Eleanor turned and took her hand. You earned this, she said softly. Not by blood. By being present. Michael stood abruptly, his chair skidding behind him. His lawyer tried to grab his arm, but he was already halfway down the aisle, phone out. He didn't make it to the courthouse doors before the screen lit up. A single message, short, blunt. Mallory made public archives. He stopped in his tracks, thumb hovering. The air around him thickened. He tapped the message open, and there it was, a link. Already live, a full repository. Photos, videos, documents. All labeled, all timestamped, all shared under the Green Trust's new public-facing digital vault. Curated by M. Green, co-guardian. Michael's mouth tightened. Then his lawyer caught up. Voice low. She just gave the judge a reason to finalize everything. They hid the past. We archived it instead. It started with a single upload. Mallory had pressed publish from the motel room desk. The same one where Eleanor had once read the letter that upended everything. The screen had flickered. The file tree loaded. Then the Green Trust archive, digital, public and fully sourced, went live. She hadn't expected what came next. By the next morning, her inbox held more than 300 messages. By noon it had passed 2,000. Strangers, advocates, hospice nurses, estate attorneys, granddaughters, sons, widowers, all saying the same thing in different ways. Thank you. This happened to us too. Eleanor stood at the window, coffee in hand, reading one printed email after another. My mother's signature was forged on an insurance payout. They told my dad he wasn't remembering correctly. He was just grieving. You made me feel less alone. Mallory sat at the edge of the bed, laptop open, refreshing the comment board. There are people from Ohio, New Mexico, Oregon, all sending in receipts, stories, even scans. One woman uploaded her grandmother's handwritten will. Eleanor turned slowly. They're testifying without courtrooms. They're testifying because someone finally made a witness stand that didn't need a gavel. Eleanor smiled faintly. That witness was you. She sat down beside Mallory, hand resting on her granddaughter's. When I first lost your grandfather, I didn't want to leave the porch. Now, they're asking me to speak in public. Mallory looked up. The senior center. Eleanor nodded. Their director emailed Ruth this morning, said I'm the quiet resistance face they didn't know they needed. You're not quiet, Mallory said, smiling. Your precision with heat. A soft buzz came from Eleanor's phone. Ruth, update. Judge reviewed digital archive. Public interest. Officially entered into the case record. His clerk said he nodded. That's rare. Eleanor's eyes closed for a beat. Then she opened them. That nod might have just made our history permanent. Another notification popped. Ruth. Drafting full guardianship language, including digital stewardship roles. Will submit tomorrow. Mallory stared at the screen. This isn't just protection anymore. No, Eleanor said. It's inheritance with spine. By late afternoon, local news had picked up the archive headline flashing on the Motel TV in muted subtitles. Family trust dispute spurs national conversation on elder silencing. Rebecca hadn't called. Jared had only texted once. I'm out. I didn't know he forged it. I'm sorry. Neither woman responded. Instead, Mallory returned to her uploads. Each photo of Richard carefully tagged. Each letter from Eleanor catalogued with soft titles like August porch light, or he paid the electric early. A whole marriage laid bare by memory and metadata. Then the courthouse call came in. Ruth, voice warm for the first time in days. You've got a ruling. She said it's not official until morning, but Judge Harper just signed the clarification draft. Eleanor sat up straighter. Final decision? She asked. Final. Ruth took a breath. Eleanor retains sole trustee rights. Mallory added as guardianship co-signer redundant. Not replacement. It's not a split. It's a safeguard. Eleanor didn't reply right away. Mallory looked at her, concern flickering. Eleanor leaned forward, pressed her fingers against her temple. I'm just remembering the day I got the first letter. Alone. Cold motel air. Wax seal. No signature. No voice but mine. Mallory reached over and gently squeezed her hand. You're not alone now. Eleanor nodded once. Then again, she took a long, quiet breath. Ruth's voice returned. And one more thing. Yes, you're cleared. Eleanor's spine straightened. Say it again. You're cleared. You're free to leave. The motel. The limbo. The court. No liens. No guardianship hearing. It's over. Mallory sat back, breath catching. Eleanor stood, walked to the edge of the bed, and picked up her scarf. She didn't rush. She folded it carefully, creased, centered, pressed, then laid it in her bag. Her voice was calm. Time to go home. Eleanor turned to Mallory, eyes shining. Let's see if the porch swing. They tried to hold me in a room. I walked away with a legacy. The tires crunched up the gravel driveway like they always had, like nothing had changed. But everything. Eleanor stepped out of the car slowly, not from stiffness but reverence. The wind curled around her ankles. The house loomed ahead, just as she remembered. White shutters, gray brick, the same hairline crack in the second step leading to the porch. But now, a hand-carved wooden sign hung under the mailbox. Eleanor's Homestead and Legacy Retreat. Mallory carried their bags, her eyes scanning the roofline like it might whisper something back. I didn't change anything, she said. Just cleaned. A few neighbors helped. They didn't want you to come back to dust. Eleanor didn't speak. Her throat was tight. But it wasn't grief. Not anymore. Inside, the living room was untouched. Furniture still draped in white cloths like ghosts waiting to be forgiven. The air smelled faintly of lavender. Richard's old diffuser, still plugged in beside the armchair he used to claim before dinner. Eleanor reached up, fingers trembling just slightly, and pulled the sheet off the sofa. Dust fluttered into the sunbeam, slicing through the window. Light caught the air like memory suspended. Mallory walked to the mantel. From her tote bag, she pulled 2 framed photographs, one of Eleanor with her daughter from years ago, the other a faded portrait of Eleanor and Richard in front of the fireplace, hands linked, eyes stubborn and soft. She set them down gently. Every home needs its heart, she said. Eleanor stepped forward, adjusted one frame half an inch to the right. That's better. A knock came on the front door. Then another. When Mallory opened it, 3 women stood there, gray-haired, gently dressed, each holding something small. One had a pie, another, a hand-bound book, the last, a candle wrapped in ribbon. We're from the senior literacy program, the tallest said. You spoke to us on Zoom last week. We just wanted to see the place. Eleanor blinked, surprised. You came all this way. Your story traveled farther than we did. The pie woman said. We figured the least we could do was bring tea. Within an hour, Eleanor's living room was full of chairs, some borrowed from the kitchen, others brought in by the women. Tea brewed on the stove. The candle was lit near the hearth, where Richard once kept a tin of matches, and a joke about how flame makes memory visible. Mallory stood quietly behind her grandmother, watching as Eleanor laughed, with women she'd never met, until her pain had gone public. One of the women, sharp-eyed and warm, leaned in. You ever think of making this place something permanent? It already is, Eleanor replied. But I know what you mean. She reached for the deed envelope Ruth had sent overnight express, signed, sealed, and now officially bound by law. Inside was the paper that mattered more than any photo, any archive. Her full title, sole trustee, legal protection. Eleanor carried it to the old hallway closet, and opened the floorboard safe. Richard had installed the same year they paid off the house. She placed the deed inside. Then beside it, the handwritten letter she'd kept since the day of that first wax-sealed threat. She closed the vault door with care, locked it, turned. Mallory waited. You did this, Eleanor said softly. Mallory shook her head. You let me. A buzz from Eleanor's phone pulled them both back. She picked it up. A message from Michael. I'm sorry. No excuses. I'll respect your space. And hers. Eleanor stared at the screen a moment, then set it face down. I accept the silence, she said, not the apology. Outside,
The wind lifted again. The porch swing creaked once. Then again its chains singing just slightly against the wood. Eleanor stepped onto the porch. Mallory joined her. Candle still in hand. Together they sat. The swing groaned, held, rocked. No war behind them, only memory. And the ground they chose not to surrender. Eleanor stood, walked inside, and shut the safe vault. One hand on the lock, the other on her heart. Behind her, Mallory whispered, "It's all protected now."